Hey everyone. So we're moving right along in our book, The Art of Play Therapy by Gary Landreth. We're going to be talking about chapter 10, facilitative responses. So we've talked a lot about the child-centered view of the child, the philosophy of the theory, the goals, how we want the child to feel, and the things that we would like for them to learn by creating and just setting up a positive, accepting environment where they can self-direct and self-determine and grow at the pace that works for them. So we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty, kind of how to actually break this down and do it effectively. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you. Okay. All right, so these are characteristics of facilitative responses. So I think what you're going to find is that this is a different approach, and we've talked a lot about how this is a different approach because it's so non-directive, and it's really about the child self-determining. We don't provide praise. We don't evaluate the child in the moment. We really just focus on creating that unconditional positive regard, that child-centered, child-directed approach. And this is how we can do that with our responses. So let's talk about the nature of being with. I'm going to move myself over here. Okay. So Rachel was a small first grader who always walked the few blocks home from school with the other children. Her mother constantly reminded her that she was to come home directly after school was over for the day. This was drummed into Rachel repeatedly, and her mother's concern was understandable when Rachel was a few minutes late getting home one day. Rachel's mother walked to the sidewalk and looked down the street. No sign of Rachel. She paced the driveway for 10 minutes, and still no sign of Rachel. After 15 minutes, Mother became almost frantic. 20 minutes had passed when Rachel finally came into view. Mother was relieved, but then she became angry. She yelled at Rachel in a loud voice, grabbed her by the arm, and ushered her into the house. After several minutes of an angry reaction, Mother finally asked Rachel for an explanation. Rachel told her mother that on the way home, she had passed by Sally's house and found Sally outside in the yard crying because she had lost her doll. "Oh," Rachel's mother replied, "and you stopped to find Sally's doll for her?" "No, Mommy," Rachel said. "I stopped to help Sally cry." So as you can see here, this is the nature of being with. We can comfort a child, we can help someone fix their problem, but how wonderfully powerful is it to just be with them and let them feel what they're feeling and be empathetic in that moment and help them experience that fully so that they can process it and move past it. So, facilitative responses include tracking, reflecting content, reflecting feeling, building self-esteem, they match the child's affect, and we avoid questions. So with all of these responses, what our main goal is truly just to be with the child and to help them grow on their own in the relationship. Caring acceptance is at the core of our facilitative responses. So we want to be genuine and sincerely interested in the child. We accept their rights and believe in their ability to take responsibility for themselves. Children who experience such an atmosphere of acceptance in the playroom learn that they can depend on others for support while developing their own sense of adequacy and independence. Acceptance is reflected by not giving advice, suggestions, or explanations, and it's not questioning or interrupting children. Empathetic responses free the child because they feel safe enough to be creative and imaginative. There's no judgment by the therapist about good or bad. By reflecting feelings without judgment, you allow the child the freedom to feel without shame. I feel like so many problems as adults could be fixed if we could just feel without shame. So much of the problems of adulthood come from stuffing down feelings or not accepting feelings or not being able to face something. And then it gets deeper and bigger and harder, and we avoid and we avoid and we avoid, and then all of a sudden it's too big and we can't avoid it anymore. And sometimes that comes with an explosion. Sometimes that comes with not meeting a goal because we've avoided for so long. There are a variety of factors at play, but I think there's a great gift in allowing children from a young age to learn how to feel what they're feeling and not being shameful for it. Qualities of therapeutic responses are brief and interactive. So they're very concise. Lengthy statements distract the child from whatever task was at hand. So we're not going to go on a tangent and say, it looks like you are drawing a picture of your feelings about your mother and how she abandoned you when you were 3 and now she's back in your life. And that's too many words. So, you want to stick with very clear, concise language, quick reflection of content and feeling. So children can't process that many words at once. So it needs to be 10 words or less. Okay, so let's talk about tracking. We're going to reflect nonverbal play behavior because remember, toys are the child's words, and a lot of times they may not be using their words. You can reflect on their words, but we're also going to reflect on their play. And these are with tracking responses. So while tracking the child, make sure that you're verbally reflecting enough. The relationship will suffer if you're staring at the child and not tracking without reflecting. So tracking, so there's a physical tracking. So you're going to kind of follow physically with your body and you're watching the child. And if you're not reflecting kind of what's going on, they're going to feel like you're staring at them. They might say, why are you staring at me? Because kids are honest like that. So don't track too much or the child will sense you're reflecting everything. So we don't want to follow with our bodies and watch them without saying enough facilitative responses, but we also don't want to track too much. So tracking statements sound a little bit like this. Oh, you're going to play with that. You put that there. Trying to decide what to do. Ah, I see you've made a plan. So those statements are all things that you could say in the playroom. But if you say, you're picking up the telephone, you put it down. You picked up the doll, you put it down. Now you're throwing the doll. I mean, it's too much. And so they're going to say, why are you, tracking my every move? So you don't want to stay away from, you're bending down, you're picking that up, you're moving on to the next activity. That's too much. So every 10 to 15 seconds or so, you may want to track or reflect a feeling. Reflecting content is another important skill in child-centered play therapy, just like it is in regular counseling. So reflecting content validates children's perception of their experience and helps to clarify children's understanding of themselves. Just like in regular counseling, children feel heard, understood, and validated in their experience. So if Scott picks up a can of Play-Doh, what do you do with this? The therapist says, and here you can decide, because of course we don't tell children what to do with toys or play materials because we want them to be able to make those choices for themselves. And Scott says, hey, it's a bomb, drops the can of Play-Doh on top of a small car in the sandbox. Blam, did you see that car? And you would say, just blew up that car. So you are essentially reflecting the content that they have just told you. So he said, it's a bomb, blam, did you see that car? Just blew up that car. And that's the same thing as someone saying, he broke up with me and then I got in my car and I drove away and I was crying. And you could just say, you were really, really upset on your drive home. That's reflecting content because they just told you exactly what happened. You're just reflecting that back. So reflecting content continued. Scott says, yeah, grabs sand scoop, quickly digs hole in Barry's car. Blew such a big hole it covered the car up. Yep, that's a big hole. The car can't be seen anymore. The people aren't hurt. They're hiding in the car, and the guy who dropped the bomb doesn't know. The people are safe, and the guy doesn't know. So again, you're just reflecting back what he said to you. You're not parroting the words. You're not saying them exactly, but you're reflecting the meaning of what was just said or what was played out. The therapist's reflective responses in this interaction are short, succinct, interactive with the child's actions and verbal descriptions. They reflect content. They communicate the therapist's acceptance, understanding, and allow the child to continue as his story unfolds. It's obvious the child feels understood and free to continue his exploration. By playing out so we've got reflecting content, which is a normal skill used in counseling. It's also used in child-centered play therapy. Now we have reflecting feelings, which is also a skill we use in counseling that you're going to use in play therapy. So by playing out their feelings in the presence of a play therapist who understands and accepts even the intensity of the feelings, children learn that all their feelings are acceptable. As children begin to experience that their feelings are acceptable, they begin to be more open in expressing them. The play therapist communicates understanding and acceptance of a child's feelings by verbally labeling the feeling. You're frustrated with that. That's a statement that you could say. If you see that the child is struggling with something and they begin to get irritated visibly, you could say, you're frustrated with that. When feelings are accepted by the therapist and reflected to children, they learn to trust their feelings. That's huge, guys. Because I think so many times when people are in dysfunctional situations, they stop trusting their feelings because they're dismissed by others. And so they question their own intuition. Reflecting a child's feelings validates the child and her feelings and facilitates the child's trusting of herself. The essential quality in reflecting a child's feeling is the communication of empathy, a feeling of being with in the experience. So if you can effectively reflect those feelings, it just solidifies their feeling that they can express them, that they will be accepted, they don't have to feel shame, and they trust what they're actually feeling because you're reflecting that back to them. The accepting therapist recognizes each feeling as being valid and so accepts each feeling. No attempt is made to convince the child that there's no good reason for feeling the way that she does or he does. Some therapists, unaware of their own needs, reject a child's feeling in the process of trying to unnecessarily reassure the child or make the child feel better. I know I've been guilty of that, particularly just working with kids in general. I think we all want to make kids feel better, so we have our own need that we're attending to there. For instance, Andy acted out an elaborate scene in the dollhouse involving a child playing alone in a room and the mother doll coming into the room and stabbing the child doll repeatedly. Considerable fear was acted out as the child doll tried to escape. In a following scene, the mother doll came into the child's doll's bedroom, carrying the sleeping doll outside the dollhouse and threw the child doll into the lake, the sandbox. During this enactment, Andy verbalized his fear that mother will get me. She's going to do something real mean to me. Having interacted with mother in the initial interviews and follow-up sessions, the therapist responded, "Andy, you know your mother loves you. She would never do anything to hurt you." Although the therapist may have substantial evidence on which to base her conclusion, the therapist can never be completely sure of another person's behavior. We can't speak for other people. We simply don't know what may take place in another person's home. In her need to reassure Andy, the therapist ignored his feelings, and so Andy did not feel understood. The therapist felt better, but at what expense? A more appropriate response would be reflect Andy's feelings would be, "You're really scared that your mother will do something mean to you, that she might hurt you. That's frightening." So there's a reason that Andy was acting that story out. There was a reason he was telling those things to the therapist. Whether they're true or not, that's not really the therapist's place to judge or correct the child. We're just reflecting the feeling. You're afraid she might hurt you. That's frightening. Okay? So reflecting feelings, validating feelings, allowing them to occur is powerful, better than simply reassuring. So you can say things like, you like, or you don't like, you're curious about, you're wondering about, you feel frustrated when, you're really angry about, that's really funny to you. So those are some things that you can say. And here's an example. So Ricardo picks up a gun, looks angry, and pretends to shoot therapist. Therapist, you're mad at me. Therapist reflects the feelings and shows understanding, and also points out the relationship between the therapist and the child. Ricardo, I'm not mad at you. Ricardo may feel anger is not acceptable and so corrects the therapist. Oh, you're not mad at me. But I'm really sick of it, Ricardo says. Therapist, so you're not mad at me, you're just sick of it. A therapeutic, so you see here, so even if the therapist doesn't get it right, it gives the child a chance to correct the therapist, particularly if the relationship is strong. So like here, she says, so you're not mad at me, you're just sick of it. A therapeutic relationship emerges as the therapist communicates acceptance and understanding. In this kind of relationship, children begin to recognize their inner value when the play therapist responds sensitively to the inner emotional part of the person by accepting and reflecting feelings, whether verbally or non-verbally expressed. We also want to, through our reflection of feelings, build self-esteem. The behavior of children is largely a function of how they feel about themselves. So the play therapist is intentional about responding to children in ways that build up their self-esteem. A self-esteem building response gives the child credit for knowing or doing. 4-year-old Christina counts all the family figures. Therapist, you know how to count. So you're recognizing and responding to a child's effort and energy to enhance the child's sense of self. So you're saying something true that's actually happening, but it builds esteem. These esteem building statements help children experience themselves as capable when the therapist responds to the effort rather than the product. So we're looking at internal qualities, not the product. It's kind of similar to reflecting feelings in that when you're saying, you feel angry and you're right, the child feels validated in that feeling and they feel like it's okay to express it. They also may realize, wow, I can do this, or I'm good at that, or I'm capable. So for instance, if you say, you made that just the way you wanted it to be, that's validating that the person made a choice that was working for them. You're working hard on that. And so for another example is if the child is working hard to fit 2 objects together and accomplishes the task, then you would say, there, you figured it out. You can also say things like, you have a plan, or you know just what you want to do. You're working so hard on that, or almost got it. Things like that. Match the child's level of affect. So we want to make sure that our tone of voice, our demeanor, our facial expressions match what the child is saying. So we're actually connecting to the feelings of the child. It's natural to match inflection, tone of voice, and level of energy. Getting too excited or overdoing an emotion in response to a child will take the child deeper in the direction you're pulling them. So we don't want to do that. If we get too excited, they're going to start to get excited and go in a different direction. You want to make sure that you aren't influencing their feelings. So your response matches theirs, they're leading you, and you're not, your response is not disproportionate to the affect that they're expressing. Another thing we don't want to do is baby talk in play therapy. It blunts their full humanity and their capabilities. And I know that it's tempting for all of us sometimes to get into that baby talk mode when we're working with younger children, but we don't want to do that in play therapy. We also want to avoid asking questions. So if you have enough information on which to base a question, you have enough information on which to make a statement. So reflections really are statements of hunches or intuitions that we have. Questions imply non-understanding, and it's possible to communicate understanding through a question. Did that make you angry? Communicates the therapist's lack of understanding, yet the therapist senses that the child feels angry or she would not ask the question. She either saw something in the child's facial expression or physical activity or heard something in the child's tone of voice that indicated anger. The therapist should trust what has emerged in her intuitive system and make a statement. You feel angry. Empathic statements go into the child's heart and soul. Questions go into the mind to be processed and evaluated. In like manner, questions about a child's play interfere with the process of play. So if you ask a question, they're going to start thinking about it, and then they get into their cognitive brain and out of their emotional brain. It takes them away from the feeling. Kind of like in therapy, a reflection of feeling can be really powerful. So if someone says, like, I'm just heartbroken, I can't seem to get over this loss, and you say, are you sad? That doesn't show a very clear understanding. But if you say something like, you're grieving with every piece of you, that's a powerful statement. And it's a reflection of what they've already just said. It's a reflection of their feeling. So it's more powerful and it shows understanding. Same thing with kids. All right, we want to facilitate decision-making and return responsibility. So the therapist does not make decisions for the child. The therapist does not label the toys for the child or the activities. So the child may ask, what color is the moon? The therapist replies, the moon can be any color you want the moon to be. When therapists make decisions for children that deprive them of the opportunity for potential use of their own creativity, they interfere with the development of responsibility. Most child therapists would readily state the development of child self-responsibility is one of the major objectives in therapy. But in reality, many limit children's opportunities to assume responsibility by making decisions for children that foster dependence. When you do for the child what she can do for herself, you teach the child that she is weak. This is powerful. This is a powerful statement. When you do for a child what they can do for themselves, you teach the child that they're weak. And you rob them of an opportunity to build natural self-confidence. I believe that self-confidence truly comes from finding your sea legs, so to speak, finding the things you're good at, finding that sense of competence and self-directedness. And you can't do that without being given an opportunity to do so. Therapeutically facilitative responses return responsibility to children, thus helping children to feel in control and to become intrinsically motivated. Don't do things for them that they can do for themselves. Responsibilities are personalized. Responses are personalized. That's what that should be. Responses should always be personalized and address the presence of the child. So you really like hitting that bobo versus David is hitting the bobo. We're not going to talk in third person in the playroom. It negates the relationship. And you're really disappointed that you didn't win versus sometimes it feels bad when we lose and want to win. So we want to make sure that we're directing those reflections at the child and making them personal to them. We want to avoid labeling toys. This has been mentioned a bunch already, but toys in the playroom are not identified or labeled until the child has verbalized an identifying label for the toy. While it may be obvious to the therapist, a truck may not be at all what the child had in mind. An ambulance, for instance. Labeling before they do takes away their autonomy and creativity. For instance, if someone says, "What is this?" and you say, "Oh, that's a fire truck." Well, in their mind, it could have been a spaceship. And so we're taking away that opportunity for them to really be imaginative and make choices for themselves. A car is not a car until the child labels it as a car. When the child picks up the car and puts it in the sand, the therapist responds, "You just put that right in there," until the child says it's a car. And then you could say, "Oh, you put the car in there." The facilitative responses are non-evaluative and do not praise. So most relationships for children are evaluative at home, at school, in a variety of situations. The play therapist has to be different from other relationships and therefore be non-evaluative to foster safety and risk-taking. So we do not praise. Praise fosters dependence. And the child asks, "Do you think my painting is pretty?" The response, "Oh, it's beautiful," ignores the child and praises the painting. Praise increases children's dependency. It fosters development of external motivation instead of intrinsic motivation, and inhibits creativity and results in lower self-esteem. The response, "Oh, it's beautiful," ignores what Haley is communicating with her facial expression. A better response would be, "You worked hard on that and you wonder if I like it. How do you feel about your hard work?" Or, "You put lots of colors on your painting and that color goes all the way up there." So you're providing a positive response and you're not ignoring the child, but you're not creating that dependence through providing an evaluative response. Facilitative responses. So these are some examples. Kathy's 8 years old and in her second play therapy session says, "Today's my birthday, but my mother said, she said I'd been too mean to my little brother, so she's not going to bake me a birthday cake." Kathy looks very sad. Tears begin to form in her eyes. Her head drops and she stares at the floor. We're not going to write the response that you would make to Kathy, but take a minute to read these and you can see that each response provides a very different reaction for Kathy. So the first one says, "Oh, so you've been too mean for a birthday cake. I bet that makes you feel sad." This response is not appropriate at all. The first sentence states that the child has been mean, when in fact the child said, "My mother said I've been too mean." That's the mother's perception, not a fact. This is an insensitive response. The attempt to touch the child's feelings places emphasis on the therapist with "I bet," and also conveys that the therapist is unsure, yet the child is standing there crying. So, "Oh, so you've been too mean for a birthday cake." That's not a very kind response either. Number 2, you feel sad and wish you could have a birthday cake from your mother. You're so worried that your mother doesn't love you anymore because you've been so mean to your little brother. First sentence, pretty appropriate. Appropriate reflection of feeling. Second sentence is too interpretive. The response confirms the child has been mean when that fact is not known. And besides, that's not the issue. How the child feels at the moment is what is important. Number 3, sometimes it hurts when people don't do what we want them to do. It does identify the hurt, but the generalization to people weakens the impact. The therapist is not a part of this happening, so the use of "we" is inappropriate. It does not focus on the child. So I think sometimes adults use this type of explaining to a child, and it's sort of appropriate, but it's not personalized enough. You seem disappointed that your mother's not going to bake you a cake. A gross understatement of the child's feelings. Ignores the child's obvious tears and sadness. So it's just an underestimation. It's on base, but it's not quite accurate. Number 5, sounds like you're pretty sad that your mom won't bake you a cake. Sounds like you're angry with her. Inappropriate use of the common counseling phrase "sounds like." So, no, the child doesn't sound like she's sad and hurting. She's experiencing and demonstrating sadness and hurt at the moment. There's no indication the child is angry. That was a projection by the therapist. Number 6, you're sad your mother isn't going to bake you a cake for your birthday because she thinks you've been too mean to your little brother. This is better, but it does not capture the feeling of the child. And it's quite lengthy. Number 7, you're really sad about a birthday and no birthday cake. You just feel like crying. Short, shows understanding by touching the child's feelings. Children do not need explanations or lengthy discourses about their experiences. The most important part of the relationship is what the child feels and experiences in the relationship. An interesting point to note is that only the last response gave recognition to the child's tears that are on her face, which were the most obvious part of the child's feelings. The absence of a therapist's verbal recognition of obvious feelings may be interpreted by the child to mean such feelings or expressions are not acceptable. So we want to make sure that we're reflecting not only on what they say, but what they're showing us. Okay. So that is all I have for facilitative responses. I imagine you have some questions after this chapter because it's pretty specific. There's a lot of pretty specific types of responses in child-centered play therapy, but we can talk a little bit more about that. Feel free to contact me or reach out to me in class. I hope that you have learned a little bit from the facilitative responses lecture today, and have a great day.